Hi, I'm Matt from HockeyReviews.ca, and this is the Warrior Ritual X4 Pro Plus chest protector review. So first of all, I should have had this review done a couple months ago. This chest has been out for a while now. The RX5 is coming out very soon. I'm not sure. I haven't seen a catalog and I haven't seen the chest to see if it is really close to it or not. I'm going to try to get an RX5 from one of the local stores like Just Hockey or something to take a look at to compare these two to see if this review will be very similar to what the RX5 will be, just to see the differences and everything. That is my goal for that, to see if this will be more relevant going forward. But for chest protectors and for this one, I want to be very certain on my thoughts on this and I want to use it for a while. Now, one thing I find a bit hard for chest protector and like pant reviews sometimes, depending on the pant, is you can have a really solid chest that then breaks down and the foams aren't dense enough so they don't last long enough. I wanted to, one, get a lot of usage out of this, and two, sometimes it's harder to find if a chest is really good or if you just got kind of lucky. Depending on where you get hit, you might never feel a shot that you shouldn't have, but you need to play more and more, and just so you get all those different opportunities on that. And that specifically happened with this chest within this more recent season of me playing. So even though I wore it for multiple seasons at this point, it wasn't until the last one that I felt a couple shots on where I was kind of surprised on and would have liked to see something different on the design of this, which obviously they can't do for the RX5 since it's already coming out, but it is something I want to see different going forward on that. One of the reasons why I ended up buying the RX4 is I've made a bunch of videos on my chest protector purchases in the past. I wore a John Brown for a while. It was a Russian spec, which means it was basically Bobrovsky's spec in the NHL. It was fantastic, but it was extremely hot and extremely heavy. It was like 9 point something pounds. Playing 3 times a night, which I was doing at the time when I had it, was honestly just awful. And it was too heavy, it was too soaked, and my stamina for it was like nothing. And it just really slows you down. So then I bought that CCM Pro Stock one, which was very good in a lot of things, but I had issues with the upper arms and there was a lot of protection issues with those upper arms. Going to a Fit 4 probably would have worked better on that, but I wanted to go to another chest, try another chest, and see if I could find something retail I wanted. There's a bunch of beefed up chests now on the market that kind of compete with that CCM Pro Stock unit. I did a whole video on that Pro Stock unit. It's really good, but instead of going to those beefed ones like Bauer and Vaughn have now, I kind of took a look at them and I was still not super sold on a few things. So before jumping into those and paying whatever for those, I've always saw people talk about how good Warrior chests are, and people always said that they're basically ones that you don't need beefing at all, and they're absolutely fantastic. I talked to some people at Warrior, asked them about what their pros in Europe use, if there's like a different version. They said it was this chest. So European goalies generally have a different thing for equipment. They don't get equipment as much. They need things to kind of last a little bit longer. And I've had multiple people from different companies tell me that, where European goalies sometimes super beef things so they last longer because they don't get as much gear as the NHL and players over here get. So that was impressive to me that the pros in Europe were wearing these. So I wanted to take a look at it and see if I thought it was that good and to see if it kind of lived up to the hype. Now there are 2 models to this chest. This one is the Pro Plus. The non-Pro Plus has a different floater design. It is more segmented and it is less big. It also has a different elbow floater design, so it doesn't really have these pieces over here. I believe it's more of a traditional piece on here, but the rest of the arms look pretty close. I haven't taken a look at that one, so I can't really talk about that one, even though I think they're very similar to each other. So I'm going to go over a bunch of the features on this chest first. So we're going to just kind of take a look at the whole overall design and how it's made, and then I'll go into coverage. So I'll put them on and show you the net coverage as well as jersey, and then we'll talk about my experience with it for protection and just usage and things like that. For the overall design on it, obviously you can see it right here, and this is a very bulky chest, which I'll kind of reiterate over and over again. But when we look at the front plate here, the design on this has a pretty solid piece of foam on here. You can flex it a bit, as you can see, and you can see the thickness for the heart guard. Now this thing is segmented down here. Also on this piece right here, it has this little Velcro and elastic. You can see the stretch part that connects down here. Now the point of this is, if you don't do this up, this part can kind of flop out like this. But once you do this up and you attach it like this, you can see it flops down to make sure this piece keeps coming back down and floats down so it stays more in here. Maybe if this is going into your chest, that would be kind of high. You would want this to be more loose, but that just sits like that. I've never noticed that piece getting in the way or anything. And it does allow a bit when you're in a crouch to actually, if you really bend this, to go up and down. So I do like how that is segmented and gives you a bit more belly protection down there, which is really solid. So continuing on this front piece, and we'll get to the floaters on the second. In here, there is just one big piece of foam back here, and the density on this is a pretty dense foam on the top, but it is still pretty flexible, so it's gonna be hard to see in camera, but you can kind of flex this foams in. It's not like an extremely dense foam, doesn't flex at all. And on here as well, it does feel like it does have multi-layers. So it has this outer piece right here, which is about that thick. And then it does feel like it has another softer layer behind it. But again, you can flex it a bit and push it in. So it's not like it's that hard plastic, almost density of a foam through it. And that is all on the body here as well. Anytime you kind of push these in, you can see that it does flex a bit, and it's not like a plastic insert, but it is pretty solid density foams all throughout, and that is going to be consistent on all these pieces here. But that is kind of how the whole body is made up here, is these hard density foams and then some softer behind it. Staying on this front piece here, you have these tabs right here that help tie into pants. I think they're supposed to integrate directly with the Warrior pants, so you can have these little loops that should come with the Warrior pants, and they attach here to hold them in place. I actually use these to tie into my bikini pants, which had little loops to pull your pants up on. I found that this chest would always pop out of that pant, so these were very useful to tie that down in. And then they have that middle tie piece right here, which is pretty standard for the front of a pants piece. Now they do have extendable pieces on the front right here and on the sides. This is just a Velcro piece like this that Velcros in for a bit extra protection down in your pant. I don't wear this, and if you untucked, this would make more sense to wear just for some extra coverage. I tucked in, and this totally gets in the way of my Warrior jock, so I take this out and it works pretty well. But it just connects on the inside here with a Velcro piece, and it's Velcro right there. So I'm just going to put it on for the time being. And you do have it on the side wings as well. You have one right here and one right here. Again, I actually keep these in now because I have found that them being a bit longer down here helps keep the pants in on a couple of my pants, especially my Vaughn ones. So if I take this out, it pops out more. So I left those in for the sides. And how that works, you undo the side like this, and you pull it out and it kind of lines up pretty nicely in here. So you just have to find out exactly where this will kind of wrap, and you put it there, close it up, and it works pretty well like that. Now going on to this whole side piece right here, I'll show how this wraps my body when I'm actually wearing it. But you can see it is decently sized over here, and it has this extra little padded piece for the sides for a bit better wrapping. And this all come Velcroable off like this, as you can see. And this is all for the strapping, which is this piece right here, and it goes in and you sandwich it down like that, which is a thing Warrior has been doing for a while now. You do have 2 layers on here, and this also kind of acts on the inner piece as well, but the inner pieces don't separate like this. I'm pretty sure this is dual density foam. I'm not sure though. This one feels like it kind of is. When you get to the back piece right here, and when you fold this over, this is another piece of like foam. It's generally a lot softer. There might actually barely be any foam in here, but there is certainly right here. But right here, it is just kind of some material, maybe some light foam on there. So you do have an extra backing piece to that. I've had people ask me over and over again of what socks I always recommend, and I've been using Cutshield for a while now. I have multiple stuff from them. So Cutshield is a company out of Canada that makes cut resistant socks, and these are their Pro Air 6, which means it's an ANSI level 6 for cut resistance on here. Full review of it up there so you can check it out. But I now have a coupon code with Cutshield, so if you want to support the channel, you can check out the link in the description to Cutshield, buy some socks, which I think are honestly one of the better socks on the market. I absolutely love them. They're pretty thin, and they are cut resistant, and they're not too hot either. Use my coupon code, you get 25% off, and it helps support the channel. Now, when you flip the chest over, you can see a few more things on here. The whole body piece does have a nice piece of foam on the inside here as well for that extra padding on here. It does have these 2 connection pieces as well. So if you really want to tie your things in somewhere, or like an inner belt, you can do that with here. I'm not sure if that's the only purpose for these or if there's something else. And when we're looking at the back, we can see the back plate, which is one of my favorite pieces on this chest protector, and I actually really like this a lot compared to a bunch of other companies. This back plate is segmented, and it has more dense foam here, softer foams here, but it does segment, and so it moves around pretty decently like this. It also has the strapping system right here, which allows the chest to kind of pull up and down the front of you through this. So if you want to undo this and undo this, you can pull this down more, and you can adjust where this back plate sits, and it will adjust how much the actual front piece sits up and down your body. I love this for adjustability. I generally do this like about right here, and it works pretty well. But also when you make that adjustment, one thing that's kind of awkward, you can see the back plate sometimes get stuck up here. So I'm not sure if when wearing this, you can make it so this doesn't interfere, but I always found just because this is kind of pulling it too tight, I wanted it to be a bit looser on here. So when I put it on like this, it wouldn't actually go all the way to the top. So it would have to be a bit more loose than that demonstration on there. So we go like this, and that way when you actually pull this, it doesn't actually interfere with this top piece and overlap it. I have found that sometimes you crank those and it gets kind of under here and it's just kind of a little awkward. So leaving it like that, I think, is a decent option. But this piece really helped adjust for when I worked retail of kids and adults just trying to figure out this chest. Some people said that this front sits too low. You pull this, it helps it come up. It was a really nice adjustment feature there and it worked very well. I also just love how big this back plate is. It kind of just fits on your back pretty nice. And this material is their like Polygene. It used to be called Silver Shield. I don't think it is Silver Shield anymore. I love this material. I wish this was on more. I find that even when this gets wet, it doesn't feel really gross. I wish it was on here more. And like on here, this is just a nylon. I talked about all my reviews of the rest of their gear, and I just wish this liner was used for more things. Onto the straps themselves, you can see they're attached right on this loop here, and then they're elastic and they loop like, you can see the stretch like this and like this, and they attach through Velcro. This is my least favorite part of this chest, and I have hated warrior strapping on these since this design came out, I have to say. This is a decent idea in terms of adjustability. You have a decent amount of range on here. You can tighten this, loosen this. My thing on here is I generally don't really like very elastic straps on here. If there's a little elastic like at the connection piece, that would be fine, but I want my chest to be relatively tight to me. So if you're wearing this really loose and it's over your pants and everything, it's kind of fine. But for this, I always just find that these are almost never tight enough, and I really had to tighten this. Look how tight this piece is, and that was from day one before it got baconed or stretched or anything. I wanted this thing cranked down and tightened down. Now the other part that really bothers me about this, because this is Velcro, I leave it out like this because you want to put this piece on inside. If I put these in my bag, which I do, I attach them like this in hopes of the sticky side Velcro doesn't get on everything. On a normal chest, you don't have to worry about that. Yes, I could throw it in the body right here and then kind of keep it nice and snug. I don't need to keep the whole thing snug together, and it's just so annoying to use and to undo all the time to just get this thing to work. As well, how this strapping works, you have to open that up, and then you put this in here and you wrap it over. So it's not like the biggest pain in the world to use. Then you just have to throw it over your head because you can't really do this when you're wearing it. Just the way that this attaches wherever you want, really. Like you have to kind of line up these straps. I always just found it was kind of awkward and it wasn't consistent, where a normal buckle strap would just make it way more consistent. I also don't like how these are a Velcro system here. I get it for like attaching pieces like this, but really you don't need a double system for this. You can just use something like this and it would still work. I just find it awkward when these close. There's sticky Velcro out here, so you really want to be careful and make sure it kind of overlaps more so the sticky Velcro isn't visible, so it doesn't get caught in jerseys or anything really. That's a nitpick a little bit, but like this is just awkward to me and I wasn't a huge fan of it ever. And using it, it kind of reinforces my thoughts on that. At the same time, I think CCM's method, where they just has a loop and then you pull the Velcro through and you overlap, works so much easier and better, and you don't have this system of opening up. I wouldn't hate this as much if they offered like beef up packages for this, but this is also on the side and it's, spoiler for protection, pretty decent on the side for protection. So I didn't really feel like I really needed a beef up package here. So honestly, this whole design is just kind of awkward to me, and I really wish it went to a more traditional design for this and just one piece with a normal strapping system. This has kind of been my thing with Warrior stuff with like the last few generations of gear, and I talked about it, especially on like the G5 blocker, where they do things like this. It's kind of a gimmicky. It works generally, but like it isn't needed. And maybe this is a cheaper design, but I feel like this is more sewing than if you just had it all in one piece. It's just too much for a reason I don't really understand. Maybe this is so you can have more adjustable strapping, so you can put it a specific spot, and if you really lower this down it would map up better, but really that could be solved by having 3 loops right here so you can choose the loops, and that's it. So I absolutely hated this piece. I found it super annoying to use when I put it in my bag. I found it super annoying to put on. I found it never really was as tight as I wanted it to, and you had to be very careful to try to make sure your sticky Velcro isn't exposed. As well, because this is touching this sticky Velcro, you can see how like this is getting eaten up a lot, and the whole seam basically right here is coming up. Going on to the back of the floaters, you have this strap right here, which can be used to pull the floaters in more towards you. So if you tighten this up, it kind of pulls. You can see the floaters being pulled inwards more. I left that pretty loose. I wanted more headroom. I found that when I had this a bit tighter and pulled in, it was even worse for my head motions. So I kind of pushed this out to the side to try to give myself more neck and head movement on here, so it's easier to kind of look behind the net and things like that. So it also has this floater adjustment on this top piece. So if you want it to be tighter into your neck, or if you want to open it up, you can pull it, open it up. This is pretty standard in terms of chest design. A lot of companies are doing this. Usually you kind of even see some more options to kind of keep it out here more, but this one doesn't really have it going up and down. It's just kind of side to side. It does have this very nice neck piece for a bit of extra coverage on here. So pucks come up here, might hit this little neck protector. This chest kind of sits a bit lower, so you have a bit of a gap on it. Again, you can adjust with the back plate, but there still is a bit of a thing there. And I always wore my Kova neck guards with these, and I found that when I didn't, I felt a bit exposed. Personal preference thing, a lot of people have no issues with that, but I always felt like there was about that much of a gap between this piece and my chest. It just felt like that was totally open. So wearing this really covers all that up and makes it a bit more comfortable for me in terms of protection fears. I really love this material on here, which unfortunately I can't really use because I wear the neck guards, but this is that material that's on the back. It's really soft to the touch. It feels really nice. So if I didn't wear those neck guards, that would be right on my kind of neck and chin, and that part is fantastic. I love that. I wish it was on more, but it's a nice little design piece on there. Some goalies even cut this out because they want this more open. I don't have an issue with my mask interfering with this piece at all, so I left it in there and it was totally fine. Now going back to the front, but also to the floaters, you can see the floater design here is kind of a 3-piece, 1, 2, and 3 on the top piece. These were added Kova accessories to help keep my suspenders in place. I really wish this was just built into chest now. It's a pretty easy thing to do. A lot of companies are adding it. How this works, that just opens up and your suspender slides in there. Having a little loop here to allow suspenders would be fantastic, and I really wish they did that. They also have, you can see how this snaps back just like this front piece does. They have a Velcro adjustment pieces on here. So if you really want to adjust this a little bit too and have this kind of more floating, you can, and even that still kind of pulls back a bit. I didn't adjust this piece right here though. So if we want to really do that, we can. We're going to really loosen these floaters off so that way they float a lot more, you can see. So you have to figure out where you like on this. I don't really know why I would really want to float this that much. For me, when I tighten this up and I just wore it kind of how it was, but that keeps them in place so you don't feel kind of shots sneaking through over here. You can see that is kind of holding everything pretty good. And when you actually wear this as well, it doesn't really come back anywhere there. So it kind of holds everything in place there. But if you did want that to kind of float the other way, like out more, you could do that and you get a bit more there with less coverage right in tight to your neck. So these floaters themselves are, I think, a place that could have been a bit better. They have a foam in here. I don't know if this is dual density. It doesn't really feel like it. And you can kind of fold it in like this. This is a case where like that CCM NHL unit had plastic inserts on here. I think that would have worked wonders for this chest in terms of just beefing this shoulder pieces a little bit. Generally, they're okay. Down here, you'd be okay because you do have the extra padding behind it as well. And you're kind of multi-layered there. But when you get up here is where you kind of notice it more. Not to say this protection was bad, which I'll talk about again at a later part, but it is something that you can kind of just see. You can see how this flexes. And I thought they added hypercomp to these, and maybe it's in there because this one does actually feel like it does have a more dense piece in here. But this just feels like it could be a bit stiffer and harder. And you can see actually this one is a lot more harder to fold than what this one is. So I'm not positive if there's hypercomp in here or not, but the thickness of this, as you can see in this video right here, is still not that thick, especially compared to how beefy those CCM ones are. They do have a bit extra foam packed back here. You can see it's pretty soft foam, but it acts as a multi-layer to one, push this away, to keep it up and to add more protection on there, which I'm fine with and happy with. But I will say that Kova back there really helped with shoulder shots. And without that on kind of the top pieces right here, you felt a lot more than I would have preferred. It's not awful. It's just not as good as it could be. And that CCM one is much better for it. Behind the floater as well, you have these segmented shoulder pieces right here, which are the same density of foams that, well, this one is actually softer, but the other ones are the same density as what you have down here, it feels like. So you do have decent layering protection on here. The top one isn't, but again, that's kind of at the very top. And I don't really expect that piece. That's like coming up here, so it's a bit harder to hit. It's okay. I just feel like this is definitely something that could have been a bit beefier. Onto the arms, and this is where I find these to be extremely interesting, is these are kind of what I call the ROBO arms. And this was kind of going back to, I think the G2 was the first model they did. This is going back to when Warrior kind of tried to jump into the NHL at one point, and they came out with these crazy arms. I think it was on the first Ritual line. Totally different looking chests in terms of it was a light gray, and these were exposed plastics, and it gave like a very beefy robotic arm shape. And they had this interesting floater design that was actually pretty different from what this was. It had an exposed plastic piece right here, and that piece cracked a lot on the NHL units. Well, I saw it on one unit, which was Gustafson when he played for Detroit Red Wings, but people mentioned about that cracking a lot. It also had a big hard plastic piece out here, and you can kind of see remnants of it where there's a little channel in here. It's like that lighter gray plastic. Basically how that would work, it would have a piece that went like this. So when this flex up, you could see it kind of coming over here. It worked really well in terms of motion, but those plastics on here broke and people complained about it a lot. This basically, to me, solves that movement issue that people had in terms of like when you have a beefy chest, the arms don't move that well. Notice it a lot in my Brown and a little bit in the CCM one, not much because the CCM one just floats above and doesn't really get in the way all that much. This arm movement is absolutely fantastic. And in my opinion, the only thing even close to this is the Bauer Supreme ones with that new kind of robotic piece I also talked about, which that one has a ton of durability issues with the stitching kind of falling apart everywhere. This one I feel like doesn't have durability issues, and I haven't noticed any stitching issues on it. The way this arm works, and I'll show it off when wearing it too though, it does flex really good. You can see this thing. That is excellent flex. It doesn't really get in the way. And these things are pretty beefy. So if I take this off to give an idea of what this looks like a bit more on the inside, it does have a plastic outer layer here somewhat. It feels like it's plastic and it sits like right on here. It's really hard to kind of get all the way through, but there does feel like there's a plastic layer in here. And then it is pretty decently padded behind it for the foams here as well. And when you really feel the sides, that is where you can really feel that plastic layer and you can kind of feel the corner of it right there. It doesn't feel as beefy as those original ones with the plastic kind of leg shell over it, but it is still solid and there's definitely a plastic piece in there. And this part is decently slimmed out compared to some other parts. These floaters still kind of get in the way just because how they do float above and how big they are. And when you kind of pull this up, you can kind of see a bit of this connection piece. There still is a foam piece in here that comes, it's this piece right here. So this piece that is attached up here with the elastic on here comes under the floater to ensure that there is no gaps. A lot of times when you look at chess, there is a gap right in the middle when you kind of get right in here. So even if puck did get right in between the seam, one, there's this plastic piece going behind, which holds everything here together. I mentioned the plastic there. That's kind of holding the whole shape together. So it can't really get straight through your arm. And then on top of that, behind that is this foam piece right here, which is going to dampen that plastic part. So if it does hit that plastic, you got foam behind it for dampening, because when you put your arm back here, there is no padding right here because that's the segment. So when it folds, it doesn't get in the way, but that's fine because you have this floating piece on top. This is a ridiculously good arm design and I absolutely love it. And a huge credit to Warrior for doing this. This is a bit different of how they did those robot arms where you really did have the exposed plastics everywhere. People said the rebounds off those were way too hot. This has a more dampening thing. Like all these have a little bit of foam on top of them to help dampen those rebounds. They still are solid overall. And I can squeeze the top here, which does have that plastic feeling insert on here as well. And I'm gonna just try to confirm that by feeling the edge of it. Yeah, I can feel the edge right here of the plastic and you can see the shape of it. So it doesn't feel like it is quite as extreme as what those old original ones are, but it's still very solid and does a very good job for that. Or looking at these floaters too, you have a molded foam here with some coverings right here that float like this, as you can see. This does get in the way of a bunch of gloves. Specifically, I find catching gloves are worse than blockers. For this, just because this is, as you can see, relatively thick and comes down pretty far, it definitely does get in for fingers up. This piece kind of gets in the way a lot when you try to move like this. Keeping your hands out more helps a little bit, but it is slightly awkward, especially if you're flexing like this, it comes down even further. It's hard for them to do. I don't know if they could even flatten this out more and kind of pull it down more, or honestly, maybe it's not even totally necessary anymore because you have those extra layers. This is a hard one because I like this protection and it's really solid, but it does get in the way. I'm not sure how they could really fix that. Maybe try to slim it down more, and maybe like this would be crazy, but if you had a piece over here that forced this up and allow it to move under, but that's tough, and that's kind of a trade-off for these excellent arm designs and this excellently padded elbow floater. So blocker interference, I mentioned this whenever I basically get a new blocker, I use this chest to test. It is fine in the Warrior. If you really kind of tilt it this way, it gets in the way, but you're not really doing that. You're really playing like this and it's fine and it's not a big issue, but you can see how like where that floater gets in the way. Even with a jersey on, it still gets in the way, but when you're actually playing and doing things like this, you're not gonna have any issues. Now for catching gloves, it's a bit of a different story. When I play my hands out like this, so it's fine, but when you turn it over, it certainly does get more in the way. This glove is okay. This is the Warrior glove, so it's almost made for this. But I do find when it's kind of like this, with a bunch of gloves, it can get in the way. Like I mentioned, the Warrior one's really good though, and it's not a big issue. I can feel it a little bit, but it's not this floater that's getting in the way. So overall, it's pretty good. But when we get into a glove, which isn't necessarily made for this chest protector, this is a true 590, which is a very popular break and a very popular glove. You can see in my hand position, it's totally fine. But once you do that finger up, it does get in the way. So if you are one of those people that does that, you can see it does get in the way. And even then, this is awkward because this cuff is directly against here, and it does get caught on the top piece as well. So it's not the best for that. And even this is kind of my hand, how it would naturally be. It does feel awkward and it is getting away a bit. So that is the reason why I always use these arms for a test for glove interference, because they are pretty big and that floater is pretty big. And you can see it does definitely interfere. Looking on this piece as well, you do have more molded foams, and you can see it all right here. So you have excellent side elbow protection, which is a place that I've seen some companies kind of lack a bit. Same with over here, this plastic comes all the way down. Some of the companies I've seen recently have a really bad padding on here, specifically the Bauer Supreme ones that aren't the beefed up ones. The padding on here you can fold in half. It's pathetic. So the fact that this is really solid and you don't really have to beef that up, and the plastic does come down there and it does have padding on the inside as well, is an excellent idea and design. Continuing on to the top, you do have chicken wing padding, this foam right here. Not super protective and not a plastic insert, but that is really just like when you go like this and covering that top piece. This is still rounded, and I don't know if this is the part where these wouldn't really be NHL legal because this piece sticks out. It is nice, a little extra protection on the top piece because your arm is more exposed over there. And that way, if you do kind of chicken wing and stuff, pucks will hit that instead of your inner body. Going on up here as well, you can see how it connects with this air mesh through here. And it has these outer caps for padding as well and for coverage. This cap is very flimsy. This cap isn't really my issue on this because it does cover mostly of this, but there have been a few times where these caps kind of working together, which this one is pretty beefy and pretty hard. There's definitely molded, maybe even a plastic in here, but I think it's just a molded foam in here. And overall, you get pretty good coverage like this on here. But I have noticed that I have had pieces in here because of kind of this gap. It kind of needs to be closed a little bit more so you don't really get hit under that gap. And that is one of my protection issues I've noticed. And you obviously have this tied design here, so it's laced in. And when we look at the back, you don't really have any adjustments on this either. It's kind of one spot and that is it. Now, if you want to lace this so you have a bit more arms, you can loosen this so it comes down a little bit, but you don't really have an up and down on here. So you can extend them by loosening it off, but it's not a super easy thing that some companies have done where it's very simple. Looking on the inside, you can see the pretty solid padding through here and back on your upper piece right here. As well, you have that piece on the inside as well on the outside. So pucks that kind of come in for a tight squeeze on your inner arm like this will be more padded with this piece as well, which I'm a huge fan of. The elbow pad itself, as you can see, looks like an elbow pad for a player, like one of the more cheaper ones, because this is an exposed plastic, which isn't a bad thing. Just for actual elbow pads, can't have exposed plastic. They're supposed to be foams. So there is a little elbow donut in here, which I can show off without taking this thing out. It's in there, trust me, which is really nice. Your elbow doesn't go all the way through. It just sits kind of on a floating layer on there, which is really good. They also have a bunch of straps on here for adjustments, and these straps I've never touched. So this strap right here to hold this piece tighter, you could loosen it, get wider if you want to. This to hold the top elbow, this to hold the bottom elbow piece. And then this is a shock guard. So if you hold your arms up like this, have a bit of protection under there, which I'm a big fan of. And this one I haven't adjusted either, but kind of comes up and down based on where this is. So if you want this to come down more, you could probably unattach that and let it float down more. I left it as is to sit there. You also have, you can see this elbow piece goes pretty deep. So this part goes all the way down there. So you have this foam for padding, which actually feels like a plastic as well. And you have this layer under here too. So excellent multi-coverage for that underarm protection, which is really solid. I wish it did have more of that yellow stuff in here where it touches your wrist. I also have found that when I crank this doesn't usually sit perfectly straight. It's a huge nitpick, not a big deal, but wanted to call it out. And you can see wear of just like the Velcro touching all this. So I do wish maybe this was slightly different, but it's a nitpick. You have to put Velcro there. It's pretty easy to use and it's not really the end of the world. And you want to support the channel and you need a base layer and a protective kind of supportive base layer that helps protect your growing as well as your hips. Check out the Cortec. This is the Pro 1.0 pant. So this one is not quite as restrictive. And this is kind of tight right here in this X pattern. You might have seen these as Under Armour before or Bauer for the hockey specific ones. There's also the Core 3.0, which is a lot stiffer, as you can see. Really helps protect my growing and keeping it kind of in place and make sure it doesn't overstretch itself. There's a discount code and you click the link in the description. use that discount code to get a discount off, help support myself, as well as get you some pretty awesome base layer pants that really do help with injury prevention and help stabilize your core while playing. Before I tuck this in and wear this how I would want to wear it, this is how it sits untucked for these pants, which is the Bond pants, but this is how it would come out. It does have the separations here that allow for the easy suspender spots, as you can see, like this, and it just sits out pretty easily. And if you want to add that more belly coverage, you can add that part down here, as well as the flaps which are on it here. Now when you go onto the side, one thing I don't like about having an untucked chest, and one of the reasons why I don't do it, I always feel like it pulls forward a bit more rather than being really tight in my body. So when you're looking here, this feels like it's almost like just more exposed and sits out, whereas if it was tucked in and closer, it just comes in more. So how it just sits like this, I don't like that, especially with how much I play RVH. So I don't want any of this to be exposed more than what it would be otherwise, but you can see how that kind of sits and what the coverage is for it. So as tucked, which is what I prefer, these pants just honestly don't really work that well with this chest. These are Vaughn SLR Pro Returns. I've also tried McKinney pants, don't work. The only ones I've been able to really work well with these are CCMs. So the Pro Stock CCMs in large and XL. This works okay with this chest. You can see how tight it is, and it's kind of sitting here. If I order custom pants, I'd get them bigger to try to keep it in, but just this chest is too big down here to really work in this. Here it looks fine, but the second I go into a RVH or a post lean, it starts to come up and then it just instantly sits out. So if I do that post lean, this part is already kind of getting up, and I added the extra longer pieces in here to try to keep it in. But really, anytime I do any sort of motion, it ends up pulling out, and it just gets worse and worse, and it ends up coming out like this when I'm playing, and it's super awkward, and I hate it. So I don't really wear this chest when I wear these pants because of that, because I'm constantly fiddling, trying to keep it in the sides and keep it from moving. Now, like I mentioned though, the coverage over here, I find with a chest tucked and that sits closer to my body, this feels like it's more covered. So in that RVH, which I do a lot like this side just feels like it's more covered, versus when it's untucked where it can come further out. Everything kind of just stays closer in here, and it just feels nicer for that, and it feels like I have more coverage there. Now, the thing that is really, really good with this chest, and I'll do it with the jersey on as well, just to give a demonstration, because you'll see in a sec, movement on this is really good, and it moves out of the way, and it moves excellent. Now, the floaters are pretty big, and it has those big caps, so when you actually do move the arms, like this, it's totally fine. As you can see, they move very easily. The robot arms work very well. They're super easy. You can kind of touch your head like that really easy. The problem is, because of these caps, eventually when you do try to go like this, they sometimes get in the way and they get locked up. And it is honestly worse with a bunch of jerseys I wear, because the jerseys kind of lock the caps in place because the jerseys are so tight because this thing is so massive. So when you do this, it often gets stuck on this piece right here. I'm trying to make it happen, and it just doesn't want to go in. That's a nitpick. This thing has unreal movement, and it never gets in the way when I'm playing with it, and it feels excellent for it. The other thing too, because of the size of everything, seal on this is very good. I definitely find, especially compared to that Pro Stock and NHL Legal CCM, going like this, the arms just seal so much nicer on your armpits. Up higher, it doesn't seal as good because there's nothing up here really, but everything down here, when you go like this, the puck, if it squeaks through, that's the max that's happening. It mostly just stays there and doesn't move, and is excellent for that. Speaking of just like stopping pucks and everything, the floaters on these are big. They're absolutely massive. I mentioned it. Hopefully it kind of shows off here. When I'm playing and when I'm in my stance, I just look massive with my floaters, and they really stick out and cover a lot. Hopefully that is evident in this view, and you can kind of see that. When I'm just blocking, I become huge with these things, and I've made so many saves off the top of the floaters that obviously I don't have a direct comparison to another one at the time to see if it would save, but it really just feels like I just get big and things just hit this and they don't go in. So it's almost like a cheat code, and it is fantastic for that. For RVH coverage, you can also see how high this floater is, and it really does help with it. Everything down here is pretty good. I mentioned kind of up here, this part is kind of a bit weaker, and I wish it was beefier, and I mentioned that talking about the block design, but RVH coverage on this is, as you can hopefully see, very good, and it does a solid job of covering most of that, and protection is pretty solid. But speaking of that protection, right here, is like when I keep getting pucks like this over and over again in RVH and hard quick shots, you do feel it. You feel it more than my CCM one does. It's not bad enough where I won't stop wearing this, but it could be better, and I wish that was an improvement. I talked about that. But when you're in here, you can kind of see where that's coming in at, and it could be beefier on the inside of here. Now, speaking of protection as well, in that RVH, I gotten a puck under this cap once, so I'm pretty sure it went under this cap, like I mentioned, and it wasn't nice. But generally speaking, these caps did a decent job in RVH. But the one that got me that was kind of annoying and happened a couple times is when I chicken wing. So it was a high shot, so I just went like this, and somehow me going like this while I was on my catching glove side when it happened, and then another time it was on my blocker side, but a shot comes in, I chicken wing up to try to stop that on the side, and a puck ends up sneaking under here somehow, and so it basically hits this and goes under and hits that gap. It's so weird how that's possible, because you're looking at it, it's like this piece really shouldn't be able to, like, a puck get under there, but it does. And that's that one weak spot that I mentioned, and you notice it, and that was basically by me going like this and chicken winging out and the puck kind of going in there. For neck coverage, I mentioned you can adjust it up and down, and this is pretty, like, I think it's pretty standard. I would say it's not too high and it's not too low, just because that backplate I didn't want to interfere, but you can see the gap. When I wore this, I did feel like I was more exposed on here than I'd want, so I put that Kova on, and it is good and it covers more. But when I'm saying like this, when I go on my stance, you can see it does cover up a little bit more, but it's still, I feel like it's a bit exposed, and I like it more because of these parts up here get a lot more coverage with the Kova, so you kind of get that double protection, and it helps on the floaters too, just because they aren't the stiffest thing, and you do get more padding. So this is a standard CCM practice goalie jersey that should be available at more stores. And even then, this thing's pretty big and it is stretchy, as you can kind of see. And even then, you can see how awkward the floaters kind of sit on it, just because they are bigger. And I've noticed this with, like, basically all my jerseys, including like AHL practice jerseys and like authentic NHL team jerseys. This thing is just big, and it gets stuck on a lot of shirts. So you really have to kind of adjust the arms so they fit right and sit in right. But it is kind of awkward, and even this one's very loose, and it's still a bit tight. But when I wear tight ones, those floater caps I mentioned really get kind of stuck, and they kind of float out. It's really odd, and it just is what it is because this thing is so big. Now, one of the downsides of a big floaters like these is helmet interference, and unfortunately that's what you're going to get with these. This is a pretty, like, high tide dangler. I always keep it so it's always overlapped and not super low, and even with this, it gets in the way all the time with this. When I'm in my stance, it still gets in the way, and it never really comes out. I did have that two-piece Apex mask that worked a bit better because the chin was shorter, but like, this is awkward. You really try to put your head forward more. It works a bit, but it's still very tough, and they definitely get in the way of your helmet. You have to figure out what you want. For me, looking behind isn't as big as a deal. I prefer the coverage. I'm going to make more saves like that, but it is awkward. And when you really are kind of in the post lean, it is so hard to look over your shoulder because everything gets caught up on here. Now, if you take that dangler away, the chin is going to have more movement, so you can get over it better. But even then with the chin, like, the chin is resting on the actual shoulders itself, and it's so hard to look over, and I lose basically all lower vision on this because I can't look down that easy. I can look through here, but I can't actually get my head out and around. It's just awkward, but it's a downside of the massive floaters. But again, I would pick the floaters. I make more saves looking forward, and I generally don't lose the puck all that much, and you can do some things like pull away a bit more, but it's not the best thing in the world. Again, figure out which one you prefer. So one of the things I have seen a bunch of comments online about for this is that this chest runs really hot. And I've honestly really questioned that feedback from them. I run very hot as a goalie and as a player, but mostly as a goalie just because of how much more I sweat in it and just because of how much more equipment is on me. And this chest has simply been the best chest I have worn in terms of sweating and not overheating. And I tuck my chest in. If you tuck your chest out and have this part out, you're going to have more ventilation, air coming through it. It's going to be better. But this chest felt great in terms of heat. Now, this back piece being the material on here and the polygiene, specifically the material itself, I find that thing when it gets wet, it doesn't feel gross and it doesn't really feel like it's a swamp on me. Compare this chest to my CCM AB Pro. My AB Pro is drenched compared to this. The brown is a whole nother level of drenched, but that thing is crazy heavy and they don't make them anymore. Even though these are all these standard nylons right here, and on the inside here there is like slightly more of a mesh nylon, feels like it breathes decently well. And it was also better than my Kineski chest that I wore, and that Kineski thing felt way looser in terms of like way less coverage and it did not fit as nice. This one just feels like it is a lot less hot than compared to that. So I'm someone who sweats a ton. I have a bunch of different base layers I've talked about over and over again, and I find this thing breathes pretty well overall. I definitely think there are places for improvements. I think this nylon material could be changed up a bit. CCM's air piece on the back, their AirTech, which has hold on the back plate for breathability, definitely is a great idea as well. So there's definitely things I think they could do on here to make it even better, but it wasn't bad and I have no concerns with it and have no issues with it at all. Now, another big part about playability on this thing is weight, and this is so light for a chest. Now, the heavy parts are the arms, especially compared to the body. The body, when you lift this up, all the weight, even here, it feels like it's on the arms and not actually the body itself. And then you lift the body and it's so easy and light. And that is mostly because of how beefy and how much plastic is in the arms compared to the rest of the body. This body is so much lighter. I should say the arms too, because the arms feel like it even though they're more heavier than the body compared to that CCM one, that is that Pro one. Now, obviously there is protection differences there because of that, but this thing is super light. When I put this chest in my bag, feels like I'm forgetting something. When I put the CCM in my bag just feels so much heavier. It is pretty ridiculous how light this is in the grand scheme of things. And playing 3 games with this has been so much easier compared to some other chests I've had in the past. For the important part, which is protection, and I talked about some of the gaps when I was wearing it, but I kind of want to cover this again here so I can go over very specific things. Forearm pieces here, you feel it, but it is fine. This is better than what my brown was. This has been the best bicep piece I have ever worn. It's also better than the CCM AB Pro. If you get hit right here, you still feel it. It's very hard to not feel shots here just because this has to taper out so it can fit into your gloves. And when you're kind of stretching out, it kind of just hits here. It's not nice, but it's good enough. And you're going to feel that all the time. The elbow floaters are absolutely fantastic. I talked about the biceps here are also amazing, especially compared to my CCM where I had to modify that one, cover the gap for there because of the sizing problem. And even then just at the top of the CCM, there's a big gap. This has been so good for protection on the arms. The few weak points, since we're on the arms, we're going to talk about this here, is sort of the arm, and it's simply up here. Now, if this piece gets hit, you're basically good and you don't really have to worry about it. And that coverage should be pretty decent here. I have had issues like I talked about where it kind of feels like it comes up and pucks have hit under here, and I don't know if it got right under here. It felt like it kind of really dead armed me under this gap here, and maybe it was through this. In fact, it probably was through this, because if it wasn't through that, it probably would have hurt a lot more. So it probably hit this, which just went to bare over here, which wasn't great and is a gap in protection, to be just totally blunt. This is just a piece of foam, as you can see, and this honestly, I feel like could be beefed up a bit. I mentioned these arms are really good. The padding on here is great, but you can see if you do manage to get a puck under here, this arm really doesn't come up all the way. It's hard to have a kind of relatively bulky arm like this keep going up. That will interfere with things. This is okay, and I've only had a few shots like this, but it's something I wish was slightly different. Like I also mentioned, this floater should cover like this, but it's one of those plays where you kind of just shrug and it just comes off a little bit and pucks have snuck in there. Really awkward, not a nice feeling, but it only happened a few times and it's not the worst thing ever, and it wouldn't stop me from recommending this. The other spot, since we are up here as well, is these floaters. Well, it does have the extra padding down here, which is pretty solid and good, and the floaters are pretty decent with the extra padding here. These floaters aren't as dense and aren't as thick as the CCM ones are. These ones do flex a little bit. Those CCM ones barely flex at all. That is just a difference on there, and you can certainly feel the difference on the shoulder floaters. Floaters are okay and they're good enough. You still feel the shots. It's not the end of the world, but I do just frankly feel naked a bit without this. When I don't wear that bottom layer, you feel the ones on the shoulders a lot more, and hard shots you just notice go through that a lot more. So if you have a good net protector like Kova, it just kind of adds to that little barrier and adds a bit more protection down here and dampening, and it makes a solid difference, and it's really good. These floaters and the pieces back here could be just, I think, more beefed just to kind of get rid of those altogether. It's not bad at all, and it's good enough. Now, one thing I do really like on here is this little extra piece of, this feels like a really dense foam. You can squeeze it, but this whole piece there is to make sure you don't get any gaps here. So if this was a normal design, you would be able to stick your finger basically right through the corner piece. This is going to stop that and ensure pucks don't hit that. Adds another brake layer to it. Fantastic design. But the other part that I think could be a bit better is this whole side section here for overall padding. It's, again, good enough and okay, but I play RVH a lot. I'm a very big goalie. I'm a very positionally safe goalie who stays in my net a lot. I can cover a lot of net. People try to jam short side and high. I RVH, I get hit here all the time. And this chest was adequate and it was good enough. It is not as good as, again, that CCM one, which is on another level with how much more dense these materials are in here with probably plastic inserts. I would, again, like to see that in here, specifically on the side pieces here. I don't find you need it as much on the body, which I'll get to in a second, but on here, I definitely feel like it'd be a nice improvement on it to just thicken this out a bit so you have more protection on there, because I do feel shots here a bit. Again, it doesn't hurt. It's kind of awkward and you don't really like it, but it could be worse, and it is overall fine and not to a point where I'm going to say no to it. It's just, I think it could be a bit better as well. If this inner liner right here just had a bit more of a dense foam to it, or maybe double the thickness, that would probably solve the issues. Generally speaking, I don't really get hit in the armpits anywhere. Like, the protection on here is covering enough. So it's not really that. It's just these aren't super stiff and hard. For the front body itself, it is good enough. You feel the odd slap shot to the body right here. It doesn't really hurt. You just notice it and you kind of know where it goes as well, and it drops and it's all good. So I don't really have any complaints about this. Everything on here feels pretty solid. This piece feels pretty solid as well for protection. Taking pucks off here, haven't had any issues. I did have some issues with gapping on my brown before, which I just got up here. I haven't had that issue on this one whatsoever. The main chest piece is pretty good and I wouldn't really change that. If you are untucking as well, this is going to be even better because it's going to be floating off your body a bit. Now, one thing I want to call out on here as a bit of a comparison, Kineski chests I wore, they don't exist anymore, but I have, people might be making comparisons if they find stuff used. The whole chest piece on that was considerably worse than what this one is. Everything in RVH, I got pegged so many times in RVH, that thing. It was lack of coverage. Foams weren't good enough. There's a whole extra level of being a lot better on that. So I'm a huge fan of that. So rebounds on this chest are interesting. People previously complained a lot about the arms and that the arms let off massive rebounds with the plastic shells, which were basically shin pads, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. And they fixed that by adding foam over top, which is right down here and also on top up here. And I don't really have issues with the arm rebounds at all. I find, generally speaking, if you get hit in the arm, it's either like just dying in front of you or it's a reach out and you can't really control a rebound anyways. For me, the one rebound spot that I kind of hated was right in the middle here. Now, I found the body was pretty decent. The floaters are pretty decent and okay. But for some reason, this piece right here, I don't know what it is because it feels like it's a very similar piece to the floaters, but the floaters can kind of move more. Anything that kind of hit this just bounced just slightly out of my catching range. And by catching, I mean pulling in like this and catching. It would hit me here and it would just kind of pop out slightly too far. Now, maybe if I didn't wear this chest so tight on my body, it would kind of have that air gap. So it hits, it goes, whoop, and then the puck wouldn't instantly bounce out. But I do wear this chest pretty tight, and I also have that neck guard underneath as well, kind of keeping that tighter on me. So I found everything kind of hit up here did kind of just out bounce more than I was expecting and made it a bit more difficult. I would love to see them kind of go to this foam material right here on this front piece. I thought they had this in the past, but if they had this kind of foam, which is just an exposed foam that would be softer than what this is just on the front, I think that would deaden those shots a bit more and kind of make those more manageable. It's kind of a nitpick. You can a little bit get used to it, but I do find that this thing just kind of pops things out more than I want. So that is about it for the review of the Warrior Ritual X4 Pro Plus chest protector. Like I mentioned, I'm going to try to compare this one to the X5 Pro Plus and maybe Pro when it comes in stock to stores. I'm going to try to grab one. Now, a few things on here I want to mention in terms of what I think could change and just kind of little small details. So I mentioned how I wish it had little connection pieces up here. One thing you technically could do is throw a suspender through this right here, but because it isn't disconnected, you can't disconnect it. It would have to be one of those bungee ones that slide through. If you're using a normal suspender like Kova, which is just the elastic stretch piece, you would have to undo the bottom piece and then slide it through, which you're not going to do. So this is kind of not useful in that sense. But really, besides the extra padding on the sides and maybe the floaters and a little bit on the arms, this is a pretty solid chest and something I would kind of easily recommend to people. It is pretty expensive and it is getting up there with the beefed versions. I think it's usually a little bit cheaper than the beef versions. So you kind of have to figure out which one you are going for. But obviously fit is a huge thing with chests. You kind of have to try them on and you have to get a good idea of what will fit for your body and what you're looking for. The shoulder things on here are very intrusive for your mask, so you got to deal with that as well if you're okay with it. I gained so much extra kind of floater coverage, and I had guys talk about it all the time and opponents joking of that chest isn't legal, get it off. I can shrug and I take up a lot of net. It's a nice thing. I don't really lose all that much without being able to look behind the net as much, so I would take that as a trade-off, but people have to figure that out for themselves. Now, one final tidbit I kind of teased about previously is something I'm going to do. I think I am going to take these arms out, so they are laced in, and it's not an easy necessarily one-to-one swap because the CCM body doesn't have this, but I think I'm going to Frankenstein the chest to get the best of both worlds. So I'm going to unlace this and take these arms out, put them onto my CCM chest. I don't know what I'm going to do with this cap. I will probably leave it in here and see how much, if I'm missing any coverage between the CCM caps and these arms right here, to see if I have to do anything with that. Maybe I take off the pieces I added on my CCM one for protection and I add that piece I have from Brown just to cover this gap a bit. But these arms are so good and they're simply my favorite arms I've used. The mobility is awesome, protection is phenomenal, that I'm going to move them onto that CCM one to kind of fix my issues with the CCM one, which was that arm protection. So that is going to kind of change things up a bit there. The CCM has such good body piece right here as well as floater protection that it's really good base. So me adding these is going to kind of mix and match the almost best of both worlds. I kind of want to take these floaters off and add them to the CCM because of the extra size to them, but I'm not sure if I'm going to go that way. It's a lot of sewing I would have to do. I'd have to basically cut these on both of them, sew them in place. So I don't know if I'm going to go down that route or not, or what I'm going to do. If I want to get crazy, I could just add these as an extra layer to be super beefy. I'm not in the NHL. I could cheat if I want to, and according to everyone online, I suck, so I should cheat as much as possible. So maybe I'll do that, but we'll see what happens. That's about it for this review. Pretty big fan of it. I was very happy to try out this retail chest, which I've often been in the custom route and the pro route before. Pesky one was super disappointing. This one is way better compared to that and is pretty awesome overall, and something, like I mentioned, I can recommend to people, which is saying a lot for a chest protector. So there's only a few of those I really look at, and I had bad experience with Bauer retail ones previously. So this one has been way better for that. And I know even Bauer's beefed up chests have a ton of seam issues where their stitching just blows out on the arms. You're not probably going to get that with this. Warrior's pretty good for durability and everything. You have some loose threads, but it's not an issue and nothing is falling off on this like it has in a lot of Bauer stuff. So pretty solid with that. Easy recommend. So thank you very much for watching this video. Hopefully it was helpful. If it was helpful and helped you make a purchase of Warrior gear, please let Warrior know on social media. Let them know Hockey Review's review of their chest protector helped them make a purchase and you would like to see more of it down the line. Just helps them know that my content is useful for people, and hopefully I can do some more stuff in the future with their gear. If you want to support the channel and you're buying hockey equipment anyways, and you live in Canada or the US, check out the links in the description. If you're in Canada or the US to Just Hockey, if you're in just the US to Pure Hockey, clicking those links, making a purchase gives me a kickback, helps support the channel so I can make more purchases like this chest protector and buy more gear to do reviews on and make content on. If you want to support the channel without buying anything hockey specifically, you can check out the links in the description to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Everything through any of those links always comes back into the channel so I can keep making more content and doing more reviews. Thank you very much for watching and take it easy.
You're watching HockeyReviews.ca.